Hi, everybody, and welcome to tonight's webinar. I'm really excited to be focusing on the basics of equine digestion. I'm excited that we've got folks from 4-H and Pony Club and FFA, and this is really designed for our up-and-coming equestrians, our young equine enthusiasts, because they are the future, and we need to make sure that just like our adults, our young folk are also understanding how their horses work. So we're going to touch a little bit on equine evolution. So when I say equine evolution, I mean, what is the horse designed to do? And we'll look at wild horses and what do wild horses do? We'll look at digestive function, which means how does the digestive system work? Food goes in, poop comes out, what happens in the middle? We'll touch on forage requirements because, as you will see as we go through this webinar, forage is the most important part of your horse's diet, and the part of the digestive system that breaks down forage, i.e. the fiber, the pasture, the hay that you feed your horse, is the largest part of the digestive system. And it's where the longest time of digestion occurs. And then, of course, what else does your horse need to stay alive, and what questions do you have? So let's first look at what is the horse designed to do. Well, number one, they're designed to eat a wide variety of forages, plants, grasses, weeds, shrubs. They nibble constantly, nipping the grass. They'll graze for about anywhere from 12 to 18 hours a day, but on average, about 17 hours out of the day is how long a horse will graze for. They move around while they eat. They don't sit at a dining table like we do and sit still. They stand up and they move around, and they stand in herds. The standing is really important. There are two types of animals in this world. There are what we call fight animals, a lion or a tiger, and if he gets threatened, he is going to turn around and fight off whatever is threatening him. And then there's flight animals, like a horse or a deer. And if they get threatened, they're going to run away as fast as they can. So the horse will stand up to graze so that if something in the wild threatens him, he can run away as fast as he can. So their muscles, their skeleton is designed so that they will actually put their head on the ground to eat. That is the most natural feeding position. That's how their muscles and bones are designed. And there are other things that happen when they put their head on the ground. We all create mucus, snot for lack of a better word, and that builds up in the horse's throat and lungs and in his nasal passages. And what it does is when they breathe in the air, and we all know right now there's a lot of tree pollen, there's a lot of grass pollen. When they breathe in that air and they breathe in all that dust and pollen and whatever else is floating around in the air, that mucus in their respiratory tract, in their nasal passage, in their nose, and in their throat will grab onto all of that pollen so they don't breathe it all the way down into their lungs and cause issues. But it's got to get out of their nose as well. If it just sits in there, it becomes toxic itself. So when he puts his head down on the ground, all of that snot drains out his nose. So it's really important that you try to put your horse's feed bucket as close to the ground as possible. And I know we learn in Pony Club and 4-H that we should be hanging our hay nets high up on the wall so that they don't put their foot in it. But there are hay nets that have really small hole sizes that are more like bags that you can put on the ground. You can put your hay net in a big muck tub. There's all kinds of things you can do to still use a hay net, but keep it close to the ground so that you're not worried about your horse getting his foot stuck in it. When they put their head on the ground, it also increases chewing time. Most of you have probably eaten your dinner for this evening, and when you ate your dinner, what happened? What else did you produce in your mouth? You produced saliva or spit. And that saliva helps to lubricate your throat so that when you swallow, you don't choke on your food. But in the horse, it also goes down into their stomach and it buffers acid. Okay? When we put their head on the ground to eat, it decreases muscle soreness in their neck and back. And also it makes their teeth align properly. You want to make sure that the surfaces of their teeth go together so that they can grind up that grain or pasture and be able to swallow it. On the right-hand side, though, that picture of a horse standing in a really nice stall, and he's got his bucket there, and it looks like it's been cleaned. Maybe he's got a heat lamp. It's in the wintertime. Well, he's also by himself. Some horses don't mind being by themselves, but a lot of horses get really anxious when they're by themselves. Horses eat a lot more cereal grain-based diet today because we ride them more. We expect them to live longer, so they need to eat more concentrated energy sources, but we need to make sure that we do that more safely. Horses have very varying levels of exercise as well. Some horses don't do a lot of exercise, others do a lot. Maybe they get injured, don't do any exercise, and we put our buckets at chest height. So the simplest thing we can do is put our buckets on the ground. I mentioned chewing and that we want our horse's teeth to wear evenly. So when we put a horse out to graze continually, they will chew about 60,000 times a day. Can you imagine chewing 60,000 times a day? My mouth would get sore. But when we put him in a stall and we feed him hay and grain, he only chews about 30,000 times. So that's a lot less saliva that he's producing that's lubricating his throat and buffering his stomach. If you look at that picture of the horse's teeth on the bottom jaw actually goes around in a circular motion. So when you chew, if you clap your hands together like a crocodile, that's how you chew, chomp, chomp, chomp. But the horse, the bottom jaw goes in a circular motion. So the teeth actually grind sideways. So you really want to make sure that they're really even and we've got as much surface area being ground together as possible so that we can chew up that hay and grain. So from the mouth, we have the throat, or we call it the esophagus. And the esophagus in the horse and the trachea, which is where the air goes down, they're two very separate tubes. Unlike in us, our esophagus or our food tube and our trachea, which is where we breathe, they're the same. And so if I'm choking on food, I can't breathe. But the horse, he can choke on food and he'll cough and cough and cough and he'll still be able to breathe. But what we worry about is that it gets up above where I've got those little red lines, and then he might breathe that down into his windpipe and into his lungs. So when they chew on hay, they produce a lot of saliva. It's like chewing on salad or broccoli. You're chewing, 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 and you're producing a lot of saliva to swallow that down. But when they chew on oats, they produce a lot less saliva. When a horse chokes, it's not because of any particular feed ingredient. It's not because you fed him beet pulp or you fed him alfalfa cubes or you fed him pellets. Hungry horses eat faster. If you come in from school and you are starving and you gulp down a sandwich and you eat it really fast, you got to take a big drink of water because it slowly goes down your food pipe and it hurts a bit. And sometimes you can even choke on it. Horses the same way. So you want to get them to slow down, chew their food properly, produce more saliva to help lubricate their throat. If you have a horse that tends to eat really fast, you want to make sure you can wet the food, you can put a rock in the food, you can give them some hay first. Anything you can do to slow them down, that will decrease their risk of choking on the food. I've talked a lot about saliva or spit. And when you put the food on the ground, how it increases the amount of that saliva that they'll produce. So if you take 2 pounds of oats or grain, whatever grain you're feeding, and you put it in a tub on the ground, the horse will chew that about 1,000 times. If we take 2 pounds of hay and we put it on the ground, he's going to chew that about 2,000 times because it takes a lot more chews to chew hay. If we take that oats and we put it at chest height though, we bring it up off the ground and hang it in a bucket at chest height, he's going to chew that about 350 to 500 times. So you can see how much less chews he's done, how much less saliva he's produced. So the saliva is buffering the stomach acid, but it's also lubricating his throat so he doesn't choke. So we'll look at this picture in green several more times, and I'll highlight in colors the different parts we're talking about. So in pink here, I've got the stomach highlighted, and the stomach is really small in relation to the rest of the digestive tract. That's why we don't feed horses large grain meals. I don't want you to feed any more than, say, 3 to 5 pounds of grain in a single meal. Why? Because look how small the stomach is. It'll just flow right through the stomach and out the other side and not be digested. If I cut a window in a horse's stomach and let you look inside, that's an actual photograph on the right-hand side there. There are two distinct regions. That dark pink tissue down the bottom is protected by this mucousy, slippery mucousy coating. You can kind of see some of it in the picture there. It's real slimy, and it protects that tissue from acid. What is an acid in your kitchen? Lemon juice. Ever stuck your finger in lemon juice? That's an acid, and it stings, especially if you've got a paper cut or a little graze on your finger. You stick it in lemon juice, hurts, hurts, hurts. A more mild acid would be tomato juice or tomato juice. Something that we would consider neutral, so it's not acid and it's not the opposite, would be water. Okay, so it's really acidy in there, and the acid breaks down the food. But you don't want that acid to build up and get too strong, because it'll splash up onto that light pink tissue, which does not have that protective, slippery, slimy mucus coating. And so we can see sores or ulcers up around the top part. Now, about 90%, that's nearly all horses, have some ulcers in their stomachs. So it's a really big issue. That what would you notice in your pony? Well, maybe he doesn't like you to brush him over his hind quarter. Maybe he really gets a bit anxious in the stall. Maybe he was a real sweet horse and then his behavior changed. His hair coat might have changed. Maybe he's gone off his food, doesn't want to eat anymore. Maybe you put your leg on him to go forward and he bucks a little because it's really uncomfortable to go forward. They all might be signs. What causes ulcers in horses? Well, if I come to your barn and I look in the stall and I see this, he's eaten all his hay and he's just standing around waiting, that would be one cause, not feeding enough hay. Why? Horses are meant to be grazing for 17 hours out of the day, and they really don't stop eating for more than 2 hours. We feed a lot of grain to our horses, and we don't always feed it safely, i.e. small meals. We trailer our horses to go to shows, go to lessons, go to camps. We put them in stables that they don't, might be not, it may be new to them, might make them a little nervous. There might be noises there that they're not used to. We do lots of exercise with them, and we use drugs like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, which is bute, long term. Now, bute's good short term, but we don't want to feed it long term because it breaks down that mucus. So what can we do if we think our pony or horse may have ulcers? Well, you can add alfalfa hay to the diet. Why? Alfalfa hay has calcium in it. And if you took calcium, like toothpaste, take your toothpaste. There's calcium in toothpaste. Take some toothpaste and squeeze it into a cup of lemon juice and mix it, and then stick your finger in the lemon juice with the toothpaste in it. It won't sting nearly as much because you've diluted it. You've buffered the lemon juice with the calcium. And so adding alfalfa to the diet can do that. And we recommend that you feed some alfalfa about 30 minutes prior to riding him. So while you're tacking him up, getting him ready, grooming him, you can give him a little bit of alfalfa. It makes saliva, which is going to dilute that stomach acid, but it also dilutes the acid with the calcium. Now we'll go to the small intestine. If you laid a garden hose out on the ground, that's what the small intestine would look like. It's 70 feet in length. So take one of your dad's shoes and put it end to end on the floor 70 times. That's the length of the horse's small intestine. It's really long. It's not very wide though. And so we had acid in the horse's stomach that was going to break down the food. And in the small intestine, there's enzymes. There is an enzyme called amylase. Amylase breaks down sugars and starches. And so that's another reason why we don't want to feed too larger meals to our horses, because the horse isn't really meant to eat a lot of sugars and starches. So his small intestine doesn't produce a lot of amylase. And once it's used up, he's got to make more, and it takes time for him to make more. So again, we want to make sure that we're feeding grains that have been processed a little bit, cracked, rolled, and we don't want to feed large meals. So from the mouth to the small intestine, all that's the beginning of the digestive system, or we call that the foregut. The stomach and the small intestine would be considered the foregut. The hindgut of the horse is from the cecum all the way back to the rectum. That's the back end of the horse, or the hind end of the digestive system. And the hindgut is full of bacteria, all kinds of bacteria, and yeasts and fungi and all kinds of little microbes that live back there. And their goal is to break down all that fiber. You can see just from my picture, the stomach and the small intestine really aren't very big compared to the hindgut, which is all this fluffy at the end here. The cecum is this yellow area here. This is like a balloon. So food goes in and out at the exact same door. So it's easy for gas, food to get stuck in there because it's just one door to go in and out. Unlike the other parts of the digestive system that have an indoor and an outdoor. Okay? So this blue section here, this is called the large colon. And this is where we start to see if a horse gets colic. We're going to see it commonly in the colon, maybe in the large or small colon. And the reason why is you can see it twists and it turns. And when bacteria get unhappy, they produce gas. Okay? And so that gas might build up and it'll be like a balloon. It'll make the digestive system rise up and twist around. And there's not a lot of room back in that back part of the horse's body cavity. So it might bump into the ribs and twist around. And if it twists around, it'll cause pain. So we want to make sure that we keep those bacteria happy. How do we do that? We feed them lots of hay. And we put things in the feed like yeast culture, which helps to feed those bacteria and keep them happy. It only takes as little as 30 minutes for food to pass through the stomach, but it can take 35 to 65 hours for it to pass through the large colon of the horse. Just like stomach ulcers, we can get ulcers in the large colon. You saw how big it was. You look at that tissue there of a horse with ulcers in its colon, that looks pretty angry. That looks pretty sore to me. And if you go pouring lemon juice on that, that's going to be really painful. So we'll see more colic-like symptoms. One of the very common symptoms of your horse having some hindgut upset would be more gas than is normal for that horse, or if they start to get loose manure or diarrhea. What can we do? Well, if your horse starts to just get chronic diarrhea and he's just not doing well, let's say you're feeding a lot of stemmy hay, that can hurt a little if they've got some pain in their hindgut. So adding some pelleted or cube forage can be beneficial. Yeast culture, which is a probiotic, it's a supplement that you can buy, can also help, just like the calcium helps in the stomach, it can help make sure it's not too acidic in the hindgut. Then we have the small colon, and really where the small colon turns and goes straight down, that's the rectum of the horse. But in the small colon, we're going to absorb moisture out of the parts of the hay and pasture and feed that was just not digestible, and that's going to make fecal balls or manure. And then it's going to get stored in the rectum, and then when that fills up, the horse will poop, and you'll have to go and pick it up. So let's start with what is the most important ingredient to put in the horse's diet? Forage, hay, pasture. And then we might add grain if we need to give the horse extra energy or nutrients that he might not be getting out of the hay. And then right on the top of our pyramid here, the smallest thing that might add into the diet would be supplements, like a hoof supplement or a joint supplement. But the forage, the hay, the pasture is the absolute most important part of your horse's diet. The absolute bare minimum is 1% of your horse's body weight. Most of our horses run around 1,000 pounds. 1% of 1,000 pounds is 10 pounds. Okay, so that would be the absolute bare minimum amount of hay that we should feed our horse in a day. At that little amount, they will probably develop stomach ulcers and get all cranky and chew wood, but it will keep the gut moving. If you've got a fat horse and you want them to lose weight, I typically don't feed any less than 1.2% of their body weight. So for a 1,000-pound horse, that is 12 pounds of hay per day. But I want you to stretch it out. I want you to spread it out, because remember, he's a grazing animal and he's not supposed to not chew on something for more than 2 hours. Typically, though, most of our horses and ponies are going to eat between 1.5% to 2.5% of their body weight, 15 to 25 pounds of hay per day. Spread it out, multiple meals, use slow feeders, whatever you can to try and mimic that grazing behavior if they don't have access to grass to chew on. What else does a horse need to survive? They 100%. The most important thing that they need to consume every single day is water. Water is absolutely critical. And in cool weather, which it's not now, the horse may drink between 10 and 12 gallons a day. Now that's average. Some horses, it may be normal for them to drink 5 gallons a day. Other horses, normal might be 15 gallons. So it's really important that you know normal for your horse, so that you go to a summer camp, you're at a boarding stable, the horse next door drinks 3 water buckets a day and your horse only drinks 1. You don't want to get people concerned if that's normal for your horse. So it's very, very important that you know your horse's normal vital signs, breathing, pulse, and you also know how much is normal for them to drink in a day. In hot weather, it's normal that an average horse could drink 20 to 25 gallons of water per day. And that is also going to be dependent on, did you ride them that day? Was it really humid that day? Did they sweat a lot that day? Is it a mare and they're lactating? Milk is water. So that's just an average. But again, know what is normal for your horse. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.